Have you ever noticed how one small percentage can completely change your retirement budget? For millions of Americans who rely on Social Security, that's exactly what's happening right now. Just weeks ago, early estimates suggested the 2027 cost of living adjustment, better known as COLA, could come in somewhere around 4% or even slightly higher. Many retirees began hoping that next year's increase might finally provide meaningful relief after another year of rising prices. But now, a brand new inflation report has changed the picture. The latest estimate has shifted, and while it's still expected to be higher than last year's adjustment, it may not be as large as many people were anticipating. So what happened? How much could your monthly Social Security check actually increase in 2027? Why are experts revising their projections? And perhaps most importantly, what does this mean for your retirement budget over the next year? Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how the new estimate is calculated, why it changed after the latest inflation data, how much additional money the average beneficiary could receive, why Medicare could reduce part of that increase, and what every current and future Social Security recipient should know before the official announcement arrives later this year. Let's begin with the biggest update. As of today, one of the most closely watched estimates for the 2027 Social Security COLA now points to an increase of approximately 3.8%. Now, before you get too excited or too disappointed, it's important to understand one very important fact. This is not the official COLA. The Social Security Administration has not announced the final 2027 adjustment yet. The official number won't be released until October after enough inflation data has been collected from the third quarter of the year. That means every estimate you're hearing right now is exactly that, an estimate. However, these estimates aren't random guesses. Organizations that closely monitor inflation and Social Security use the same economic data that the government relies on. The only difference is that they're making projections before the final months of inflation data become available. That's why estimates continue changing throughout the summer. And that's exactly what happened after the newest inflation report. Earlier in the year, many analysts believed inflation would remain elevated enough to support a COLA somewhere between roughly 3.9 and 4.2%. But after the latest Consumer Price Index report showed inflation cooling more than expected, projections moved lower. The newest estimate now sits around 3.8%. At first glance, that might sound disappointing. After all, nobody likes hearing that a potential increase has become smaller. But let's put this into perspective. A projected 3.8% COLA would still represent a larger adjustment than the previous year's increase. In other words, even though expectations have been revised downward slightly, beneficiaries could still receive a stronger increase than they did last year if current projections hold. And that's an important distinction many headlines fail to explain. Instead of focusing only on the estimate coming down a few tenths of a percent, it's equally important to recognize that the projected increase remains relatively healthy compared to recent years. Now let's talk about what this could actually mean for your wallet. Percentages are useful, but dollars pay the bills. Suppose someone currently receives approximately $1,900 each month in Social Security retirement benefits. If the final COLA were close to 3.8%, that monthly benefit could increase by roughly $70 per month. Over an entire year, that could amount to hundreds of additional dollars. For some households, that extra income may help cover rising grocery prices. Others may use it for utility bills, prescription medications, transportation expenses, or simply creating a little more breathing room in an already tight monthly budget. Now imagine a retired couple where both spouses receive Social Security. Even a modest increase for each person can make a noticeable difference in total household income across an entire year. That's why millions of Americans pay such close attention every October when the official COLA announcement is made. For many retirees, it's one of the most important financial updates of the entire year. But here's something that surprises a lot of people. The inflation number you hear discussed on television every month isn't necessarily the same inflation measure used to calculate Social Security COLA. This is one of the biggest misunderstandings surrounding the annual adjustment. Many news reports simply mention the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. While that's technically true, Social Security actually uses a much more specific version of that index. It's called the CPIW. The W stands for urban wage earners and clerical workers. Why does that matter? Because this index reflects spending patterns for working households, not specifically retirees. And that's where the debate begins. Many senior advocacy organizations have argued for years that older Americans spend their money differently than younger workers. Think about your own budget. If you're retired, where does a large portion of your money go? Healthcare, prescription drugs, doctor visits, insurance premiums, housing, utilities. These categories often make up a much larger share of retirement spending than they do for younger working families. Yet healthcare costs don't always move the same way as the CPIW. In many years, medical expenses increase faster than the inflation measure used for Social Security. That's one reason some retirees say their annual COLA doesn't feel as generous as the headline percentage suggests. On paper, benefits increase. But in real life, healthcare costs, insurance premiums, and other essential expenses may rise just as quickly, or sometimes even faster. This discussion has led many organizations to support using a different inflation index specifically designed around spending by older Americans. So far, however, the formula used to calculate Social Security COLA has not changed. The current system still relies on CPIW. Understanding that difference helps explain why retirees sometimes feel their actual cost of living rises faster than their Social Security benefits. Now, here's another important detail almost every beneficiary should know. The official COLA calculation doesn't use inflation data from the entire year. Instead, it focuses on one specific period: July, August, and September. Those 3 months are incredibly important because they're used to calculate the third quarter average CPIW. That average is then compared with the same period from the previous year. The percentage difference becomes the following year's COLA. This means something very interesting. Even though we're already discussing estimates, the final number can still change depending on what happens with inflation during the remaining summer months. If inflation rises unexpectedly, projections could move higher again. If inflation continues cooling, estimates could move lower. That's why experts continue updating their forecasts every time new economic data is released. Nothing becomes official until the required inflation reports have all been published. And that's why patience is important. Many online headlines present early estimates as though they're final. They're not. They're educated projections based on the best available information today. In the next part, we'll explain why Medicare premiums could reduce part of your COLA increase, why future retirees should pay attention to these estimates even if they haven't claimed Social Security yet, and the biggest planning mistake many Americans make when estimating their retirement income. One of the biggest questions people ask every year is this: if my Social Security benefit goes up because of COLA, will I actually receive all of that extra money? The answer: not always. And this is where many retirees are caught off guard. A COLA increase tells you how much your benefit is scheduled to rise before certain deductions are taken out. But what actually lands in your bank account may be a different amount. The biggest reason? Medicare Part B premiums. For most Social Security beneficiaries, Medicare Part B premiums are deducted automatically from their monthly benefit before the payment is deposited. That means if Medicare premiums increase for the new year, part of your COLA could be used to cover that higher cost. Let's use a simple example. Imagine your monthly Social Security benefit increases by $70 because of the new COLA. At first glance, that sounds like wonderful news. But if Medicare premiums also increase by several dollars each month, your actual take-home increase becomes smaller. Instead of seeing the full $70 raise in your checking account, you might only notice $60, or perhaps even less depending on your individual situation. That's why many retirees say something like, "My COLA disappeared." In reality, it didn't disappear. Part of it simply went toward paying higher healthcare costs. This is also why financial experts encourage retirees to wait until both the official COLA announcement and the updated Medicare premium information are released before calculating exactly how much additional monthly income they'll have. The percentage alone doesn't tell the whole story. Now let's shift our attention to something equally important. What if you're still working? Maybe retirement is 5 years away. Maybe 10, maybe even 20. Does any of this matter to you today? Absolutely. In fact, understanding COLA today can help you make better retirement decisions tomorrow. Here's why. Every retirement plan depends on assumptions. How much will your investments earn? How much will inflation increase over time? How much income will you need every year? And How much will your future Social Security benefits grow because of annual COLAs? Many people never think about that last question. They simply assume Social Security will continue increasing every year without asking how much. Others make the opposite mistake. They assume unrealistically large annual increases forever. Neither approach is ideal. When financial planners estimate future retirement income, they typically use long-term assumptions rather than focusing on one unusually high or unusually low COLA. For example, if someone assumes Social Security will increase by 4% every single year for decades, their retirement projections may become overly optimistic. On the other hand, assuming no future COLAs at all could underestimate future income significantly. That's why many retirement professionals prefer using conservative long-term inflation assumptions, not because they expect benefits to grow slowly every year, but because conservative planning creates flexibility. If future COLAs are larger than expected, that's welcome news. If they're smaller, your retirement plan is less likely to face unpleasant surprises. Think of it this way. It's generally easier to adjust to receiving more income than expected than discovering you've planned around assumptions that never materialize. This principle doesn't apply only to Social Security. It applies to investing, budgeting, healthcare planning, virtually every aspect of retirement. Hope for the best. Plan responsibly. Now let's talk about something else that often gets overlooked. Social Security doesn't exist in isolation. Many people think of it as simply one monthly payment. In reality, it's connected to almost every part of your retirement finances. Your withdrawal strategy from retirement accounts, your tax planning, healthcare expenses, required minimum distributions, investment income, cash flow planning. They're all connected. Let's imagine two retirees. Both receive exactly the same monthly Social Security benefit. Yet one person feels financially comfortable while the other struggles every month. Why? Because Social Security is only one piece of the overall financial picture. One retiree may have very little debt. The other may still have a mortgage. One may own their home outright. The other may be paying increasing rent every year. One may enjoy excellent health with relatively low medical expenses. Another may face significant prescription costs every month. The same COLA affects each household differently because every retirement budget is unique. That's why comparing your situation to someone else's rarely tells the whole story. Instead, it's more helpful to ask yourself a few questions. Has inflation changed my essential monthly expenses? How much of my budget goes toward healthcare? Am I relying entirely on Social Security, or do I have additional retirement income? Are my emergency savings adequate for unexpected expenses? Questions like these often provide much more useful insight than simply focusing on one percentage announced each October. Now, another topic that's been receiving attention recently is whether the current inflation formula truly reflects the financial realities facing older Americans. As we discussed earlier, COLA is based on the CPIW. However, many economists and senior advocacy organizations have argued that retirees experience inflation differently than younger working households. Think about your own spending over the last year. Have grocery prices increased? What about homeowners insurance, car insurance, prescription medications, medical specialists, dental care, long-term care costs? Many retirees would say those expenses have become some of the fastest growing parts of their budget. That's why discussions continue about whether Social Security should eventually use a different inflation measure specifically designed for older Americans. No changes have been made to the formula at this point, but it's a conversation that continues every year because retirement spending patterns simply aren't identical to those of younger workers. Whether that formula changes someday remains uncertain. But for now, beneficiaries should expect the existing calculation method to remain in place. The important thing isn't just knowing the percentage. It's understanding how that percentage is determined and why it sometimes feels different from your personal experience. Because your personal inflation rate may not always match the government's inflation index. And that's perfectly possible. Now let's look at what could still change before the official October announcement. The biggest mistakes retirees make after hearing early COLA estimates, and the practical steps you can take right now to prepare, regardless of what the final 2027 adjustment turns out to be. Right now, the latest estimate points to a 2027 Social Security COLA of around 3.8%. But remember, that number is still only an estimate. The official adjustment won't be announced until October after the final third-quarter inflation data is available. If inflation changes over the next few months, the estimate could move again. That's why it's important not to make major financial decisions based on today's projections alone. The key takeaway is this: stay informed, understand how COLA is calculated, and be prepared for the official announcement rather than relying on headlines or rumors. We'll continue following every inflation report and every Social Security update, so you always know exactly what it means for your monthly benefits. If you found this update helpful, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us bring you accurate, easy-to-understand Social Security news without the confusion or sensational headlines. And before you go, let us know in the comments, what do you think the final 2027 COLA will be? We'd love to hear your prediction. Thanks for watching, stay informed, stay prepared, and we'll see you in the next update.